So no, I haven't asked my father to intervene. The whole point of a risk management board, what I know throughout this legal process is the interference that was created came from the royal household.
One sentence. That's all it took. A single offhand comment from Prince Harry, and suddenly the internet started connecting dots no one was supposed to see.
It was the royal reunion 19 months in the making. Prince Harry has met with King Charles at Clarence House.
Within hours, whispers about Archie's DNA turned into full-blown chaos, forcing questions the palace never wanted asked. Was this a harmless slip, or the moment a decades-old rule was quietly broken? What Harry accidentally revealed didn't just shock royal watchers, it threatened to blow open the most sensitive secret of them all. In the early hours of December 2nd, a short statement released by Buckingham Palace set off a chain of events that quickly became one of the most disruptive royal stories in modern history. The announcement appeared on official palace communication channels just after 6 in the morning, London time. It contained only 9 sentences, but within minutes it was being treated by news organisations as a breaking global story. According to the statement, a series of legally authorised DNA tests had been conducted in relation to Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, the son of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. The palace said the tests had been reviewed by multiple independent laboratories and that their conclusions were consistent. The statement claimed that the results showed Prince Harry was not the biological father of the child. The palace did not include emotional language or speculation. Instead, the tone was formal and precise. It stated that the testing had been carried out through proper legal channels and that the findings had implications for matters of succession. The announcement made clear that the issue was being treated as a constitutional and legal matter rather than a private family dispute. It ended by saying further investigations were ongoing and that additional statements would be issued when appropriate. Within minutes of the statement's release, major television networks in the United Kingdom, the United States, and across Europe interrupted regular programming. Newsrooms scrambled to confirm the authenticity of the announcement. Royal correspondents quickly verified that the statement had come directly from Buckingham Palace and had not been issued in error. By the time many people in Britain were waking up for work, the story was already dominating morning news coverage. Social media reaction was immediate and intense. Phrases connected to the announcement began trending globally within the first 20 minutes. Legal analysts, constitutional scholars, and royal historians were invited onto live broadcasts to explain what such a statement could mean if the claims were upheld. Many commentators emphasized that no comparable situation existed in living memory, particularly involving a child already listed in the official line of succession. While the public response was unfolding at speed, attention soon turned to California, where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were living at the time. Due to the time difference, it was late evening there when the palace statement was released. According to later accounts published by several media outlets, Prince Harry was at home when his phone began receiving a rapid series of alerts, messages, and missed calls. Sources quoted in the days following the announcement said the first messages came from security advisors and legal representatives in the United Kingdom. Family contacts also reportedly tried to reach him. When Harry accessed the palace statement directly, those close to him later described his reaction as one of disbelief. Several reports claimed he initially assumed the announcement must be a hoax, a cyber breach, or a coordinated attempt to embarrass him publicly. According to these accounts, Harry immediately contacted his lawyers in Britain to ask whether Buckingham Palace had genuinely released such a statement. When he was told that the announcement was authentic and official, witnesses said his response shifted rapidly from confusion to distress. He reportedly described the claim as impossible and irrational, insisting there must have been some mistake. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, people present described a visible change in his condition. His breathing reportedly became shallow and rapid. He appeared disoriented and struggled to focus on conversations. Multiple sources later characterized this moment as the beginning of a severe psychological shock response. Meghan Markle was reportedly present during this period and attempted to calm him. According to accounts that emerged afterward, her efforts did not ease the situation. Some sources claimed that when she tried to explain that the situation involved complexities he did not yet understand, Harry reacted with visible distress rather than reassurance. Witnesses described him as appearing stunned and emotionally overwhelmed. Emergency services were called shortly before 11 o'clock that evening, local time. Paramedics arrived at the residence and assessed Harry on site. On symptoms reported later, they treated him for acute anxiety and shock before determining that he needed to be taken to hospital for further evaluation. He was transported to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, where he was admitted for monitoring. Medical staff who later spoke anonymously to journalists described the scene as deeply troubling. They said Harry appeared unable to process the information he had received. According to these accounts, he repeatedly insisted that he was Archie's father and seemed unable to reconcile the palace statement with his lived experience of parenthood. Doctors reportedly classified the episode as a severe panic attack combined with acute psychological distress. Hospital staff also noted that Harry had complained of chest pain and dizziness, prompting cardiac monitoring as a precaution. While no long-term physical damage was reported, medical professionals described his mental state as fragile and concerning. Several sources later characterized his condition that night as one of emotional collapse rather than simple anxiety. Meghan Markle arrived at the hospital shortly after the ambulance. Observers quoted in subsequent reports said her behavior stood out under the circumstances. Rather than appearing visibly overwhelmed, she was described as focused and controlled. According to hospital sources, she immediately began asking about privacy measures, information access, and who might be notified of Harry's admission. These details, while secondary at the time, would later attract significant attention as analysts attempted to reconstruct the hours following the announcement. At that moment, however, the focus remained on Harry's condition and the extraordinary claim made by the palace. Back in the United Kingdom, the royal household was managing its own internal response. Media reports stated that senior members of the royal family had been informed shortly before the public release, in line with established protocol. Prince William, as heir to the throne, was reportedly briefed in advance. According to sources familiar with that briefing, his reaction was mixed, combining concern for his brother with the understanding that the issue carried serious legal implications. What became clear very quickly was that Prince Harry had not been warned prior to the statement's release. Palace officials did not dispute this. In later briefings, advisors indicated that the decision had been deliberate. Their reasoning, as later explained by commentators familiar with palace procedures, was that advance notice could have interfered with legal processes or allowed for the development of competing narratives before formal findings were placed on record. By the end of the first day, the story had moved beyond speculation and into sustained global coverage. Newspapers and broadcasters began replaying earlier interviews, analysing public appearances, and examining past statements for context. Legal experts continued to stress that the palace statement, while dramatic, was framed carefully to limit interpretation until further investigation concluded. Despite the intensity of the coverage, many questions remained unanswered. The palace had not identified how the DNA testing had been initiated. It had not disclosed the timing of the investigation or whether Prince Harry had been aware of any concerns beforehand. The statement also did not address personal responsibility or intent, focusing instead on constitutional implications. As night fell again in California, Prince Harry remained under medical supervision. According to later reports, he was kept overnight for observation. Friends and associates described him as emotionally shattered, struggling to come to terms with a claim that challenged not only his public role, but his understanding of his own family. By that point, the impact of the announcement was already clear. What had begun as a short, formal statement had triggered a personal crisis for Siront, one individual and a broader institutional crisis for the monarchy. The first stage of the story was not defined by investigations or legal arguments, but by shock, disbelief, and the immediate human consequences of a claim that reverberated across continents. As news of the palace statement spread, attention shifted rapidly from the initial shock to the broader implications for the royal family and the British constitutional system. While the personal impact on Prince Harry dominated early coverage, legal experts and royal commentators began to stress that the situation extended far beyond an individual crisis. At its core, the issue raised questions about succession law, public accountability, and the limits of privacy within a constitutional monarchy. Within the royal household, responses varied according to role and responsibility. Prince William, as the Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, was reportedly informed of the findings shortly before the public announcement. According To individuals familiar with the briefing who later spoke to the press, William's reaction reflected a complex mix of emotions. There was concern for his brother's well-being, particularly given reports of Harry's hospitalization. At the same time, William was said to recognize that the matter involved constitutional obligations that could not be set aside for personal reasons. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was also briefed as part of standard protocol. One question she reportedly raised, later repeated widely in media analysis, was whether Harry himself had been told before the rest of the world. Palace officials confirmed shortly thereafter that he had not. This confirmation intensified public debate, with critics questioning the morality of releasing such information without direct prior notice, while supporters argued that legal considerations justified the approach. Princess Anne's response, according to sources quoted by several outlets, was notably pragmatic. Known for her focus on duty and constitutional clarity, she reportedly viewed the situation primarily through a legal lens. Commentators close to palace operations said Anne emphasized that succession rules are based on biological descent and that personal feelings, however painful, could not override established law. While she was said to acknowledge the human cost involved, her position reflected the long-standing principle that the monarchy operates within a defined legal framework rather than as a private family. King Charles faced perhaps the most difficult position of all. Reports indicated that he was informed of Prince Harry's hospitalization shortly after the palace statement became public. According to royal correspondence, Charles expressed concern for his son and initially wanted to make direct contact. However, legal advisors reportedly urged caution. Any communication between the monarch and Harry during an active investigation could potentially be scrutinized or subpoenaed, particularly if questions of fraud or misrepresentation were later pursued. This advice placed the king in an almost impossible position, balancing his role as a father with his responsibilities as head of state. Analysts noted that the monarchy's credibility depends in part on the perception that it adheres strictly to constitutional processes, even when those processes cause personal harm to members of the royal family. For Charles, this meant limiting personal engagement at a moment of profound family distress. As these internal dynamics played out, constitutional experts were brought into the public conversation at unprecedented levels. Broadcasters in Britain and abroad invited legal scholars to explain why biological lineage matters so deeply in succession law. Many pointed to the Act of Settlement of 1701 and subsequent legislation, which established that eligibility for the throne is based on descent from a specific royal bloodline. Under this framework, legal parenthood, or adoption while recognized under family law, does not qualify an individual for succession. This distinction became central to understanding the palace's decision-making. According to legal analysts, once doubts arose about biological descent, palace officials were legally obligated to investigate. If those doubts were confirmed, they argued, withholding the information could itself be seen as a breach of public trust. From this perspective, the palace statement was framed not as an act of punishment, but as disclosure of a constitutional fact. Public reaction to this argument was sharply divided. Opinion polling conducted in the days following the announcement suggested that a significant portion of the British public believed the palace had acted appropriately, given the legal implications. Others disagreed, arguing that the method and timing of the disclosure were unnecessarily harsh, particularly toward Prince Harry and a child who had no control over the circumstances of his birth. Media coverage reflected this split. Some commentators framed the palace's actions as cold but necessary, emphasizing that the monarchy's legitimacy rests on transparency and adherence to law. Others criticized what they saw as a failure of compassion, suggesting that the institution had prioritized its own protection over the well-being of family members. The question of whether Prince Harry knew about the situation before the announcement became one of the most heavily debated aspects of the story. The palace statement itself did not address Harry's knowledge or intent. This omission left space for speculation, and commentators quickly divided into opposing camps. Some suggested that Harry must have been aware of the circumstances surrounding his son's conception. Others argued that his reported medical collapse strongly indicated genuine shock. Former palace staff and royal biographers weighed in cautiously. Several noted that major personal and medical decisions within royal marriages are not always shared with extended family or palace officials in full detail. At the same time, they acknowledged that issues affecting succession would normally trigger heightened scrutiny. This tension added to the uncertainty surrounding Harry's role. Within Parliament, the situation prompted urgent discussions, though formal proceedings would come later. Lawmakers from across the political spectrum acknowledged that the matter raised difficult questions about privacy, consent, and the evolving role of the monarchy in modern Britain. Some members expressed concern about the precedent set by court-authorized genetic testing involving minors, while others stressed that succession law leaves little room for discretion. Legal commentators pointed out that the palace had taken pains to frame the matter as an ongoing investigation rather than a closed case. The statement's reference to further inquiries signaled that officials were examining not only biological facts, but also the processes by which information had been recorded and communicated. This included questions about documentation, legal representations, and whether any misstatements had been made knowingly. International reaction added another layer of complexity. In the United States, where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were residing, coverage often focused more heavily on the personal and psychological dimensions of the story. American legal analysts emphasized that under US family law, biological connection does not determine parental rights in the same way it does under British succession law. This contrast highlighted the unusual position of a family straddling two very different legal systems. Royal historians were also drawn into the discussion, offering context from past centuries. While disputed successions are not new in British history, experts noted that modern technology, media scrutiny, and genetic testing have transformed how such disputes unfold. What might once have remained a private suspicion could now be examined with scientific precision, creating pressures that earlier monarchs never faced. As the second day of coverage unfolded, the narrative increasingly shifted from the initial claim to the systems surrounding it. How had the situation reached a point where such a dramatic announcement was necessary? Why had it been handled in this particular way? And what safeguards, if any, existed to protect individuals caught between personal identity and constitutional obligation? For Prince Harry, these broader debates were largely abstract at that moment. Reports indicated that he remained under medical supervision, with doctors focusing on stabilizing his mental health. Friends described him as withdrawn and struggling to engage with the constant flow of information. The public, meanwhile, continued to debate his role, his knowledge, and his future within both his family and the institution he had stepped away from years earlier. By the end of this phase of the story, one thing was clear: the palace statement had opened a fault line that extended through the monarchy, parliament, the media, and public opinion. What began as a technical disclosure had evolved into a national and international reckoning over transparency, authority, and the human cost of constitutional duty. The next stage would involve uncovering how the palace had arrived at its conclusions and what evidence lay behind the claims that had shaken both a family and an institution. As the immediate shock of the palace announcement began to settle, attention increasingly turned toward how Buckingham Palace had arrived at such a serious conclusion. Officials had made clear that the statement was not based on speculation or media pressure, but on a structured investigation that had unfolded over many months. Reconstructing that process became essential to understanding why the palace acted when it did, and why it framed the issue as a constitutional necessity rather than a private dispute. According to multiple accounts from legal analysts and palace sources, the investigation did not begin with doubts about paternity. Instead, it started as part of a routine administrative review conducted earlier in the year. These reviews are standard within the royal household and are designed to ensure that records connected to succession, titles, and legal status are accurate and defensible. Given ongoing public debates about the monarchy's transparency and funding, palace officials had reportedly become more cautious about documentation that could be subject to scrutiny. During this routine review, legal clerks noticed minor inconsistencies in records related to Archie's birth. At first glance, these discrepancies appeared administrative rather than substantive. Birth documentation was present and legally valid, but some of the details did not align neatly with standard procedures typically followed for royal births. Under normal circumstances, such inconsistencies might have been corrected quietly or attributed to clerical error. However, given the constitutional importance of succession records, senior legal advisors decided that the irregularities warranted closer examination. One of the first issues identified involved the listed place of birth. Official documents stated that Archie had been born at Portland Hospital in London, a private medical facility often used for high-profile births. When Palace legal team sought confirmation as part of their verification process, hospital administrators responded through formal legal channels that they had no record of Meghan Markle being admitted for delivery on the dates in question. While the hospital confirmed that preparations had been made for a possible royal birth, there was no documentation indicating that the birth had actually taken place there. This discrepancy raised immediate concerns. Place of birth, while not directly tied to succession eligibility, is a foundational detail in legal records. If that information was inaccurate, investigators questioned whether other aspects of the documentation might also be incomplete or misleading. At this stage, Palace officials expanded the scope of the review, shifting it from administrative verification to a more comprehensive inquiry. Private investigative firms specializing in discrete legal inquiries were brought in to assist Palace lawyers. Their task was to reconstruct a detailed timeline of Archie's conception, birth, and the associated medical records. Investigators examined public statements, press releases, and official communications issued by the Sussexes and the Palace at the time of the pregnancy and birth, comparing them against available documentation. As this work progressed, investigators reportedly found additional inconsistencies. These did not amount to proof of wrongdoing, but they suggested that certain public narratives had been simplified or altered in ways that were not fully reflected in medical or administrative records. At this point, the investigation remained internal and confidential, with no assumption of intentional deception. The turning point came several months later when Palace legal advisors received an anonymous tip through a secure legal channel. According to reporting that followed the announcement, the individual claimed to be a former employee of a fertility clinic in Los Angeles. The tip alleged that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had undergone in vitro fertilization procedures and that donor sperm had been used in the successful conception. Anonymous tips are not uncommon in high-profile cases, and Palace officials initially treated the claim with caution. However, the information provided was unusually detailed. It included specific clinic names, approximate dates, and descriptions of procedures that could be independently verified. Because the allegation, if true, would have direct implications for succession law, Palace lawyers concluded that they were obligated to investigate rather than dismiss it. Using authority granted through British courts, which retain jurisdiction over succession-related matters, legal teams sought cooperation from US authorities. This process involved navigating complex questions of jurisdiction, privacy law, and international legal cooperation. American courts are generally protective of medical privacy, particularly where minors are concerned. However, because the inquiry related to constitutional law in the United Kingdom, limited access to certain records was eventually granted under strict legal controls. Records obtained from the fertility clinic confirmed that Meghan Markle had been a patient during the relevant time period. The documentation showed multiple IVF cycles and embryo transfers. Most significantly, clinic records indicated that donor sperm had been used in at least one successful cycle. The donor's identity was protected under California law, and no identifying information was provided to Palace investigators. Medical documentation also showed that Prince Harry had provided sperm samples during earlier stages of fertility treatment. However, those samples were not associated with the embryo that resulted in Archie's birth. Investigators noted that while Harry's samples had been tested and stored, they were not used in the final successful procedure. One of the most sensitive aspects of the investigation concerned consent. IVF procedures using donor sperm typically require written consent from both partners, particularly when the couple is married. Clinic records showed consent forms signed by Meghan Markle authorizing the use of donor sperm. However, the corresponding signature line for Prince Harry was blank. There was a notation indicating that partner consent had been obtained verbally and that the partner was unavailable to sign due to travel commitments. Legal experts who later reviewed these documents described them as ambiguous. Verbal consent is recognized in some medical contexts, but the absence of a signature on such a significant decision raised questions. Investigators could not determine with certainty whether Harry had been fully informed about the use of donor sperm, whether he had agreed without fully understanding the implications, or whether he had been unaware of the decision altogether. As the investigation deepened, Palace officials sought definitive confirmation of biological paternity. Given the seriousness of the implications, circumstantial evidence and medical records were not considered sufficient. DNA testing was deemed necessary, but obtaining it presented both ethical and legal challenges. Archie was living in California under the care of his parents. Palace lawyers worked with US courts to obtain narrowly tailored orders allowing DNA samples to be collected during routine medical appointments. These orders were issued under seal to minimize public exposure and were limited strictly to genetic verification relevant to succession law. In August, during what Archie's parents believed to be a standard pediatric checkup, authorized medical staff collected cheek swab samples. Chain of custody protocols were applied to ensure the integrity of the samples. The samples were then sent to 3 separate accredited laboratories for independent analysis. 2 laboratories were based in the United States, and 1 was located in Switzerland. The laboratories conducted standard genetic marker comparisons between Archie's DNA and Prince Harry's known genetic profile. According to Palace sources, all 3 labs reached the same conclusion. There was no biological relationship between Prince Harry and the child. The consistency of the findings across independent facilities was a key factor in the Palace's decision-making. The results were returned in September and presented to senior Palace officials in a series of confidential briefings. King Charles was formally informed during a private meeting with legal advisors. According to accounts later shared by royal correspondents, Charles initially questioned whether any error was possible. He was reportedly told that the likelihood of error was effectively negligible, given the procedures followed and the agreement across laboratories. At this stage, Palace officials also reviewed the fertility clinic records alongside the DNA results. Taken together, the evidence suggested that donor sperm had been used and that Prince Harry was not the biological father. What remained unclear was Harry's knowledge and intent. Investigators found no direct evidence that Harry had knowingly participated in deception. Consent documentation was inconclusive, and witnesses could not establish that he had been fully informed of the donor decision. Medical records also showed that Harry had fertility challenges that could have complicated discussions around conception. Several advisors reportedly concluded that Harry was more likely to have been misled or kept partially uninformed than to have actively misrepresented the situation. Princess Anne was brought into the review process once the DNA results were confirmed. Known for her focus on institutional integrity, she reportedly advised that the matter could not be handled quietly. If a child had been placed in the line of succession based on incorrect biological assumptions, public disclosure was required. In her view, the longer the information remained undisclosed, the greater the potential damage to the monarchy's credibility. By October, Prince William was briefed on the investigation's findings. According to sources present, he expressed deep concern for his brother while also acknowledging the severity of the situation. William reportedly stated that whether Harry had known or not, the outcome was catastrophic, both personally and institutionally. Through November, Palace legal teams debated how and when to make the information public. They considered options ranging from private family resolution to full disclosure. Ultimately, advisors concluded that because succession is a matter of public constitutional interest, withholding the findings was not legally defensible. The decision was made to issue a carefully worded statement focused on facts rather than motives. The timing of the release was deliberate. Parliament was in session, allowing for immediate discussion if legislative clarification became necessary. The language of the statement was reviewed extensively to avoid speculation about personal intent or blame. By the time the announcement was made in early December, the investigation had been ongoing for nearly 8 months. What appeared sudden to the public was in reality the final step in a long and complex process driven by administrative review, legal obligation, and scientific verification. The next phase would shift focus once again, away from evidence gathering and toward the long-term personal, legal, and constitutional consequences of what had been uncovered. In the aftermath of the Palace announcement, the attention of both the public and the media gradually shifted from the mechanics of the investigation to the long-term consequences for the individuals involved and for the institutions surrounding them. While the Palace had framed its statement narrowly around constitutional necessity, the human fallout proved far more complex and enduring. Prince Harry remained under medical supervision for several days following his collapse. According to sources familiar with his treatment, clinicians identified his condition as an acute psychological crisis triggered by extreme emotional shock. Doctors reportedly observed symptoms including panic, dissociation, confusion, and profound emotional distress. While his vital signs stabilized within hours of admission, his mental state required continued monitoring. Medical professionals later described his response as consistent with someone experiencing a sudden rupture in personal identity. Mental health experts interviewed by various outlets explained that such reactions are not unusual when a person's core beliefs about family, trust, and self-definition are abruptly undermined. In Harry's case, these effects were magnified by the public nature of the revelation and the involvement of institutions over which he had little control. According to individuals who interacted with him during this period, Harry repeatedly returned to the same assertion that he was Archie's father. Staff members and acquaintances described him as struggling to understand how biological definitions could negate years of lived experience. Psychologists commenting publicly noted that the distinction between genetic paternity and social parenthood is intellectually clear but emotionally difficult, especially for someone deeply invested in their parental role. Meghan Markle's actions during this period continued to draw scrutiny. Hospital. Staff and individuals close to the situation described her as composed and focused on managing external risks. She reportedly engaged frequently with legal advisors, security personnel, and public relations consultants. Her questions reportedly centered on confidentiality, information control, and the likelihood of media exposure. Observers offered differing interpretations of this behavior. Some suggested it reflected a practical response to the crisis, shaped by years of intense media pressure. Others viewed it as emotional distance at a moment when visible support might have been expected. Commentators cautioned, however, that outward behavior in crisis situations can vary widely and does not necessarily reflect internal emotional states. Within the household, tensions reportedly escalated. Staff members speaking anonymously to journalists described a marked change in daily routines. Harry was said to spend extended periods alone, avoiding shared meals and limiting interaction. Several sources stated that he found it difficult to engage with Archie without becoming overwhelmed, while interactions with Meghan were reportedly strained and minimal. Friends of the couple, speaking in the background, described an atmosphere of silence rather than confrontation. According to these accounts, unresolved questions about consent, knowledge, and trust weighed heavily on the relationship. Whether these tensions represented a temporary crisis or a permanent fracture remained unclear. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, political and legal consequences continued to develop. Parliamentary discussions expanded beyond the immediate question of Archie's place in the line of succession to broader concerns about how succession law interacts with modern reproductive practices. Assisted reproductive technology, lawmakers noted, had advanced far beyond the assumptions underlying centuries-old legislation. Constitutional scholars testified that British succession law is unusually rigid compared to other legal frameworks. While family law in many jurisdictions recognizes intent and social parenting, succession law relies strictly on biological lineage. Experts acknowledge that this rigidity can produce harsh outcomes, but argued that flexibility could introduce ambiguity and legal instability at the highest level of state authority. Some members of Parliament questioned whether reforms should be considered to account for changing family structures. Others cautioned against altering succession rules in response to a single, highly specific case. The prevailing consensus was that while the issue merited discussion, immediate legislative change was unlikely. Legal analysts also examined the possibility of civil or criminal liability. Much of this analysis focused on intent. If inaccurate information had been provided unknowingly or through misunderstanding, legal consequences would likely be limited. However, deliberate misrepresentation related to succession could, in theory, constitute fraud against the Crown. Particular attention was paid to the fertility clinic consent records. Legal experts noted that if donor sperm had been used without full and informed consent from both partners, this could raise serious ethical concerns. However, determining jurisdiction, responsibility, and enforceability would be complex, given that the medical procedures occurred in the United States under American law. In public discourse, sympathy for Prince Harry remained relatively strong. Polling suggested that many viewed him primarily as a victim, caught between personal vulnerability and institutional obligation. At the same time, support for the palace's decision to disclose the findings remained substantial, reflecting public belief in the importance of transparency where constitutional matters are concerned. Media coverage began to slow but did not disappear. Long-form analyses explored the emotional toll of secrecy, the pressures faced by couples, dealing with fertility challenges, and the ethical questions surrounding disclosure. Several commentators drew parallels to non-royal families, noting that while the scale differed, the underlying issues of trust and communication were widely relatable. Archie's situation remained especially sensitive. Legal experts consistently emphasized that under American law, Harry remained his legal father, regardless of genetics. Child welfare advocates urged restraint in speculation and called on media organizations to prioritize the child's privacy. Several outlets adjusted their coverage accordingly, though online discussion remained difficult to contain. Within the royal family, communication reportedly remained limited and cautious. Prince William was said to be concerned for his brother, but constrained by institutional considerations. King Charles continued to follow legal advice to maintain distance, while reviews were ongoing. Royal aides described an atmosphere shaped more by legal prudence than by emotional disengagement. As the weeks passed, attention gradually shifted to broader cultural implications. Commentators observed that the case had exposed the collision between deeply personal experiences and public systems designed centuries earlier. Fertility struggles, assisted reproduction, and questions of consent are common in modern life, yet they rarely intersect with constitutional law in such a visible way. Mental health professionals repeatedly stressed the importance of compassion. They warned against simplifying the story into narratives of villainy or heroism. Trauma, they noted, often produces behaviors that appear confusing or contradictory to outsiders. Healing, they said, would require time, privacy, and professional support. By the end of the year, no further substantive palace statements had been released. Legal reviews continued quietly. Public attention moved on, though the underlying issues remained unresolved. For Prince Harry, the future appeared uncertain. Questions lingered about his marriage, his relationship with the royal family, and how he would redefine his identity after such a profound disruption. What remained undeniable was the scale of the impact. Decisions made years earlier under emotional strain and private pressure had produced consequences that extended far beyond the individuals involved. The case underscored how secrecy, even when intended to protect, can ultimately amplify harm when exposed to legal and institutional scrutiny. In the end, the story was not only about succession or biology, it was about trust, communication, and the fragile line between private life and public responsibility. For those caught at that intersection, the cost was measured not in headlines or legal documents, but in relationships altered and identities reshaped by a truth that could no longer remain hidden.